Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We'll give it a couple minutes to let more folks get into the Zoom. And I hope everyone's doing well. It's a beautiful sunny day in Phoenix. I know the Suns are playing, so if we have any basketball fans out there, thank you for skipping the game and joining us today to talk a little bit about this. We're way more exciting than the Phoenix Suns, I can guarantee that, especially how they played game one. Just a couple more minutes as folks still are, a couple more seconds, excuse me, as folks are coming in. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So thank you all for coming today. As you all know, this is Alumni Week here at Third Decade, our chance to really engage with our alumni, our past participants, and our current participants on some topics that they find that are still top of mind for them as they're moving forward, for you all, excuse me, as you're moving forward in your lives and your careers. And today is going to be an opportunity to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship. It's a question that we get often from folks about, what are some things you should be thinking about? What does the journey look like? And how do we proceed forward, potentially into starting my own business? So today will be an opportunity to meet, to talk with our panel of experts, just to really get some feedback and some information about how to be successful in this potential journey of yours. So before we get started, just a couple of points I want to highlight. So we have a chat. Introduce yourself. Drop your name and your location in the chat, and also put in when you went through Third Decade. It'd be great for everybody to know, when you went through Third Decade, and just where you're at. I'm going to see what's a good cross section of folks that we have from around the country. So feel free to use the chat during the conversation as well too. It'll be an opportunity for you to engage. If something's resonating with you, please just let us know. We'd love to hear how the conversation is going and how it's really resonating with your current life or your future life as well. But we will have an opportunity for there to be a specific Q&A section, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. So we'll have specific questions from you guys at the conclusion of the actual questions that we have up front. So it'll be an opportunity. So whatever you have, drop it in the Q&A, and we'll have a chance to answer as many questions as we can as we kind of proceed forward. So without further ado, I want to spend some time first thanking our sponsors. This week could not have happened without some of our great sponsors here at Third Decade, CLA Accountants, Pima Federal Credit Union, and Empaqua Bank. So there are some folks who really we relied on to really make this week a success, and we're thankful for their contributions to our mission. So now, let's just go ahead and get started. We have four wonderful individuals who are giving of their time and their expertise to help us answer some burning questions, and I really want to just thank you all in advance for this, and just have an opportunity for us to meet you all before we get started. So I'm going to start with Danny. So Danny Nee is the Executive Director of the Community Investment Corporation, a Tucson-based nonprofit organization dedicated to enhancing economic access through initiatives in homeownership, education, and entrepreneurship. Danny has more than 20 years experience in the nonprofit sector, and during his 8-year tenure at CIC, the organization has been named the most impactful regional nonprofit twice by the Tucson Chamber of Commerce, and just received the 2024 Bloom Award for the Community Foundation for Southern Arizona for a vital nonprofit. A graduate of Johns Hopkins University, Danny also has an MBA from the University of Arizona and a master's degree in city and regional planning from Rutgers University. His professional work focuses on disparities in capital access and creating solutions to reduce inequities in how money moves through our economy. Danny is also an entrepreneur, co-founding with his wife, Cecily, Single Focus Web, a web development firm dedicated to serving nonprofit organizations. Say hi, Danny.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me tonight.
Absolutely. Next is Valerie. Valerie Pallera has over 47 years of experience in the nonprofit sector. She has been involved in startups, growth, and strategic planning for all types of nonprofits. Her positions have included city manager, executive director, development director, and human resources director. Valerie has been involved in the animal welfare area for over 40 years, and she is currently the executive director of a nonprofit, Soul Dog Lodge and Training Center. Valerie currently serves as the chapter chair for SCORE Southern Arizona. She has been with SCORE for over 9 years, and Valerie recently was appointed to the Pima County Small Business Commission. Say hi, Valerie.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you. Next, we have Wesley Perry. Wesley is the workshop chair of SCORE Southern Arizona. Wesley has experience in sales and marketing through selling software to real estate agents and investors, largely designed to help generate leads and acquire more inbound traffic to their businesses. He works with clients to talk about different inbound and outbound marketing tactics, as well as ways to attract customers through digital marketing. He generally helps people go over social media marketing, websites, SEO, Google My Business, paid ads, and more. Wesley also has a lot of experience working with online tools such as CRMs used to manage and communicate with customers. He's built several websites over the years, so he's familiar with several website builders and domain registrars to help business owners make informed decisions about creating an online presence. His expertise lies heavily in helping businesses and business owners pinpoint different tools needed to automate workflows in their business and be more efficient and generate leads. Say hi, Wesley.
Hey, everybody. Happy to be here.
And last but not least is Steve Elliott. He's the lead senior tax manager at Ascend Advisors. Steve enjoys helping high net worth individuals and their families, including expatriates, to handle various tax compliance filings and planning, including trusts, estates, and gifting. He has worked more than 40 years as a CPA and tax director. Steve graduated magna cum laude from Bentley University in Boston with a master's in taxation, and cum laude from Northeastern University in Boston with a BSBA in accounting. He has also earned advanced taxation and personal finance planning certificates and holds current Texas licenses as both a CPA and a notary public. Steve is a current member of both the American Institute of CPAs as well as the Texas State Society of CPAs, and is an adjunct income tax professor at Houston Christian University. In addition, Steve is a financial mentor for Mercer Advisor employees and for Third Decade. He and his wife, Margaret, and 3 daughters live in Katy, Texas, where Steve also facilitates Greek support groups. Say hi, Steve.
Nice to see everybody.
So as you can see, there is no lack of experience and talent in the folks we were able to pull together for us today. So thank you all for being here. And without further ado, let's jump into our first question. And we're going to leave this one for Valerie and Wesley. So many of our alumni and participants are interested in starting a business or becoming an entrepreneur. What are some concrete steps they should take to begin the process for themselves?
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I do have something that I'd like to share with everybody, and it is available after this discussion. Can everybody see it? Thumbs up?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So when you're looking to start a business based upon what you've gone through in your training with Third Decade, you kind of get to a point of whether you kind of want to become an entrepreneur, whether you want to go out and get some job experience, whatever it is that you're trying to do. When you're thinking about starting a business, obviously, there are a lot of different things that you want to kind of think about yourself, your personal goals, where you are strategically in your life, and really how much risk you want to take going forward if you are going to move forward with becoming a business owner. But with SCORE and with a lot of the people that we work with, we have 5 simple steps to start a business. And I'd like to share them with you because I really think they're going to be very helpful as you start to put things together in your mind of where you want to go. You know, the first step is really to name your business, and there's some things that go along with that as far as aligning your business with your goals, and also then verifying that nobody else has that business name, and then making sure you're selecting that business and holding it with the Arizona Corporation Commission. So when you think of the name of the business, you really want to make sure it kind of matches with what you are trying to do out in the community. The second step is to select and register your business structure. And that really kind of goes through different types of things of different types of corporate structures. And I know Steve is going to talk a little bit too about different corporate structures and taxes related to that. But really in Arizona, you can only really select corporate, nonprofit, or limited liability company. And you kind of then pick that corporation and you stay with that. But again, as you move in with your business, sometimes your corporation does change and your structure. You then go ahead and get your EIN number, which is your employee identification number, and that goes with the IRS. And then you would open up a business checking account. And even though this is my fifth step, create a business plan, it really should be at the top of your list. And the reason why I say that is because the business plan really encourages you to be objective about the business and test your business concepts. It has you look at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it really helps you well define what your business is, what your niche market might be, what your target market is, what your branding is, and where you want to focus your effort on. The last part that really helps with a business plan is all about your financials and learning about your profit and loss. What will you be doing now and 3 years from now? And all of this put together in a really good business plan is something that is a powerful tool for you to obtain needed funding, capital, or donations. So those are really important things. And this one right here, create a business plan. There's a lot of different ones out there, but this is something that you really kind of want to focus on first. And then the last thing I have here that you might want to take a look at, this is really pretty interesting, is that even though you have a business or you are already an entrepreneur, you might want to always take a self-assessment for yourself, just to kind of make sure that your idea, your market identification, and your funding and your personal readiness is always there based upon your business. Now, it looks like a lot of you have already either started a business or are interested in it. But even if you have started a business, there is nothing wrong with you always taking a look at this business plan and rehoning it, and also making sure that your marketing and your branding is standing out and setting you apart from other people.
Just as a quick follow-up, Valerie, I know that it can be intimidating to step to the idea of thinking about creating that business plan. What is a piece of advice you would give folks who are kind of intimidated and thinking about, okay, I have an idea, there's some templates out there for business plans, but I'm kind of intimidated to get started. What are what's some potential way that they can get started?
So there's a couple ways. One is obviously with SCORE, you're able to get with us. It's free mentoring, and we kind of walk you through the steps from A through Z and help you test your theory. The other is if you are really thinking about doing a business group or business, I really suggest to a lot of my people, and Wesley, you can jump in, to test it with your friends, focus groups, start looking at who your competition is as well. Because as you put your business together, you will have competition. And sometimes I suggest a lot of times to either volunteer or to look at your competition and learn what they're doing to find out what they're doing differently. But it's also it's small steps. But writing that business plan, I can't emphasize how much that really helps you focus and kind of find where your nerves are and where that piece is where you're not quite sure, because that business plan really helps you strengthen. But you know what it does? It inspires you. It inspires you to keep moving forward.
Yeah, just to jump in there, it doesn't necessarily need to be like an overnight activity when you write your business plan. I mean, we have people we work with SCORE that they're changing their business plans on a constant basis because the goals for their business change, or the things that they want in the end are different than when they actually started the business plan. So also don't feel like you need to rush through it and kind of get a lot of this information put in there very quickly. The more research you do and the more thorough you are with your business plan and understanding who your niche market is and who you're trying to target and the things you want your company to represent, the better.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Okay, I will stop sharing, and this will be available for you after the seminar.
All right, let me reshare the presentation. So moving on to question 2. So having access to the funding required to start or run a business is vitally important. How can entrepreneurs get access to capital in this market? And what is venture capital and how does that fit into this discussion?
All right. Well, there are different types of capital that people start their businesses with. And the most common is actually people saving their own funds. Roughly, it depends on the study you read, 70 to 80% of businesses are started with one's own savings and wealth and or the savings and wealth of friends and family. So getting others that you know that are close to you that will invest in you. The other types of capital that are available, there's debt capital, and that's basically a loan. And then the other piece of the capital ladder is equity, and that's when you basically get an investor who generally is going to share in the ownership of your business in some way. Those are the three basic ways. What In terms of getting capital in this market, generally speaking, and this is something I think is good starting off with Valerie and SCORE, is to be able to get it, you need to convince somebody that you have a business that's worthy to invest in, unless you have your own capital. Again, a lot of times people are starting it up with their own or asking friends and family. But if you're going to somebody else, to an institution, you are going to need a solid business plan. And in fact, one of the sort of bummer parts about getting funding for a business that isn't already up and running is it's very, very difficult. Very few lenders are going to give you money because you have to. I just want to separate out for people how it is lenders think about your business. Lenders, you could have the greatest idea in the world. It could be the next Google. You're going to make $1 billion. And the reality is the lender doesn't care. The lender doesn't care because they don't actually share in the upside of what you're doing. All they ever care about in general, and we're a nonprofit lender and we're pretty nice about what we do, but what we still care about is, can we get repaid? And that really, it doesn't look at how good a business is going to be. What it tends to do is look backwards. It wants to see that you have a track record of making money. You can get capital based on your personal finances. You can start businesses with personal loans, things like that. And they would be looking then at your credit, your personal finance, and your personal wealth. In terms of having a good idea and having somebody else, an investor, look at it, and that includes venture capital. That was part of the question. Venture capitalists, like you see on Shark Tank, they tend to be looking at very sort of narrow types of businesses. They want businesses that are going to be incredibly scalable. They want when they invest money, they're going to want a very big return. Oftentimes, if they give you something like $100,000, they're going to want to see $1 million return on it. And what they're focused on is the upside of your business. And again, they're going to be looking at scalability. Very, very few businesses get venture capital. Less than 1% of all businesses. Although we spend a lot of time, in part because of Shark Tank and others, talking about venture capital and these types of things, it is not generally the way that people look to start their businesses. Those, again, they're very select. They have to be businesses that the trajectory of them is going to be that, they can be, very quickly a million, 10 million, $100 million dollar business. And most businesses aren't like that. Most businesses that we talk about, we start, they're called lifestyle businesses. They're restaurants, and they're much sort of smaller in scale. The business my wife and I started, which is a web company. So in terms of getting capital, the hard part, and why nonprofits like ours exist, is that if you don't have existing wealth, it is very hard, and it's very hard to get capital. If you don't have a home or something to pledge as collateral, it's very, very hard to get capital. And so, again, depending on the type of business that you're looking to start, my suggestion often is to try to start with something small. If you haven't run a business before, even if it's not your dream business that you want to run, try to start a business that has low overhead, that has very little investment. Again, and just as an example, the business my wife and I started, all that was needed was her experience and knowledge and a computer. She didn't have to pay rent on anything. She didn't have to buy any inventory to sell, any of those types of things. It was something that we could do with very little startup capital. Generally, to get more capital, unless again it's this great idea and tech idea, you're going to have try to start the business yourself. And again, that's probably from your own resources, from friends and family who may want to invest in you. And that's why my suggestion is, if you can, try something small first and really learn about what it takes to run a business, all the parts. And that includes, I think, Valerie, it is great to have a plan in place in terms of who your market is, who you're going to sell to, why it is that your business is better or different. If you haven't gone to any sort of business training, that is actually the first place I would start. I know the question is about capital, but honestly, until you've started a business and have any sort of track record, it's going to be very, very hard to get people to invest capital in your business. So go and get business training. They have a lot of things. The number of questions that they'll help you ask yourself that you haven't thought about is incredible. There's so much to know and to consider about owning a business. And at the same time, I think it's a really great thing to do, once you're ready to do that. But there are lots of resources before you ever spend a dollar on starting a business to really educate yourself first and try to do something, again, if you haven't done it before, that has low initial investment to it, if you can, and then learn about running a business by running a smaller business that doesn't take a lot of money, even like a side hustle of sorts.
And I think to tag on to what Danny is saying is, when you look at your business plan, the thing about the business plan is it really helps you scale that down to something that is more realistic and potentially viable and sustainable. So sometimes we get people, like Danny said, that come in with these really huge ideas, but they can actually move forward very nicely with something smaller and scalable to get that business background and experience to be able to move forward. So that doesn't mean that the dream doesn't exist. It means that it comes in a different way or a different format and different timing for yourself.
Yeah, and if you can, and part of my answer is to try to save you time too. Like if you don't have a business up and running, you're not going to be able to get a commercial loan. You might be able to get and again, it doesn't matter how good your business idea or plan is. It's just not something banks or lenders do. They don't invest in ideas. They invest in track records when you're talking about debt. And otherwise, you would need to find an investor, somebody who might co-own something with you, get a percentage of your business. And if they believe in your idea, you might be able to get money that way. But you're not going to be able to get it from institutional sort of lenders.
And I think too, Danny, correct me if I'm wrong, it also goes for nonprofits. If you're thinking of starting a nonprofit business, it's not to get grants, money, or capital. You have to be able to operate your nonprofit or your business to be able to show your track record. It's the same type of thing.
It is. And oftentimes nonprofits actually start as volunteer organizations that then are able to solicit some donations. And it's the same sort of thing. You need a track record before you can actually get grants or even apply for grants. So it's not, some people want to start nonprofits. It's also, you need to sort of have a plan about how you how you go about doing that. Sometimes what I do suggest is if you have a nonprofit, instead of starting your own, if you have an idea, it would be to try to talk to an existing nonprofit and embed that idea into somebody who already runs a program, because they are going to have the track record where you might be able to apply for loans and apply for grants and those types of things.
Thank you both. That is great information. All right, question number 3. Steve, question for you. So one thing that has to be taken into account when starting or running a business is keeping an eye on the future. So particularly your retirement savings. What should entrepreneurs or those in the gig economy do to ensure they're preparing for retirement?
Well, that's a great question. One thing that wasn't discussed earlier is in deciding what type of business to be is, how do you report it? And, not to forget about the taxes. The key thing in business is, is this going to be your primary source of income, or is this a side hustle? You're working full time and you're building something up on the side. I, for example, work full time. I buy a tax program and I do tax returns on the side. So, it costs me like $500 a year for the software. I have a computer. I'm selling myself my time. But the key forgotten piece here in the puzzle is retirement. I mean, so much is thought about paying back the loan or paying back the person who gave us the money or making payroll or paying rent, or however your business is laid out to be. But the key thing to remember is to even set up a little bit as you're able to for retirement. And there are a number of ways to do that. Most people have heard of an IRA, an individual retirement account. Depending on your age, this year you can put away either $7,000 if you're under 50 or $8,000 if you're over 50. There's one IRA bucket uh, that you can do, and then you can decide based on your income and deductions and where you stand, whether it's a traditional deductible IRA or a Roth IRA. Roth, in my opinion, is the best one because even though you're not getting a tax deduction for it, that type of retirement is not taxed to you or your heirs later. If you have a side gig and you're making money and you're self-employed, you're working for yourself, there are other types of plans like a solo 401k or a SEP IRA. There are many types of retirement plans as you grow. Um, the simplest, of course, is the IRA. You can set those up at Fidelity. You can set them up at your local bank. You can choose how they're invested. But there are many types: IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, SEP IRAs, and more complicated, more deeper type of retirement as your company grows. But they're all dependent on whether you have employees or not and how much money you're making to be able to fund those. But everyone should at least consider putting money into a IRA account annually, at least, to because the power of earnings and just and tax-free growth in those funds is just amazing to think about.
Thank you, Steve. And I know that's probably something that folks who are starting out in their entrepreneurship journey struggle with as far as, where's my income coming from? How's it going to go towards the business? And the fact that you also need to start thinking about your future when it comes to that. So that's a very important distinction.
The other thing that comes into mind with that as well is what type of entity do you choose? As Valerie mentioned early on, you could be a self-employed person. That's called the DBA, doing business as. That's the most simplest. However, that doesn't give you any liability protection. Being a DBA, doing business as, you can step up and elect to be a LLC, a limited liability company. That gives you liability protection, but there's an annual cost to do that based on the state that you are living in and operating your business in. But at least your personal assets, if you were ever sued, would not be at risk. Then you need to look at who you own your business with. If it's just you or you and your spouse, you can file through your personal tax return and you're considered a disregarded entity. But if you own a business with anyone else, a parent, a sibling, a coworker, a friend, you have to at least be a partnership or elect to be a C corporation or an S corporation. So it's really important as you're developing your plan to also think about who you're going to own this business with, whether you need employees, because the critical components when you have employees is not missing payroll, and you're then using people's withholding money. There are liabilities for that. So there are all sorts of decisions that go along with that, but it's really key to know who you're going to own it with.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. So for Valerie and Wesley, there's a lot of talk about younger generations and the folks that we serve in our at third decade, not wanting to really be in the 9 to 5 era anymore. Can you discuss some of the pros and cons that should be considered when deciding to work a 9 to 5 or whether to begin your journey to become an entrepreneur? And part two of that question is, if you already have a side gig or small business, what considerations should be made when to turn that full time?
So one thing I want to stress, and it's important, is that if you own your own business or you were thinking of doing that, I don't think there's, and anybody can disagree with me, I don't think there's anything really 9 to 5. I think owning or starting a business, it's a lot of dedication, a lot of hard work, and there is no clock. In other words, it takes whatever it takes is what you do to get your business started and going. So that if you are looking for a 9 to 5, maybe owning your own business isn't the best thing, but it does, owning your own business and starting your own business requires a lot of dedication. And that's why that self-assessment is important, because you've got to be willing to, one, take the risk, you've got to be willing to put the time in, do the research, and really to begin your journey, you really are going to put a lot of energy into that. There is one thing that I want to kind of think about. I'll let Wesley jump in here as well. One of the things I stress with my nonprofit is really that self-care as well. In other words, even though you're working very hard, you really have to find time for yourself and to rejuvenate and to bring yourself back in for that inspiration when you're owning your own business. So if you are looking for that 9 to 5, probably owning your own business isn't the best thing. But whether you work 9 to 5 for someone else or you own your own business, I really want you to find that balance for yourself, because that's what really helps you stay ahead and on top of it and forward and always looking for that kind of that new opportunity. If you have a side gig on the side, turning that into a full-time business, that's a whole nother kind of discussion. And it comes back to what Danny was saying about when do you see that it's moving forward and you've got some really good, skills behind you, experience behind you. And when do you kind of hit that wall of when do I kind of take it from that homegrown to the jump into something, getting employees, staff, whatever it is. I don't think there's a really good answer for that. I think it comes out to when you are ready to move forward and take that second risk, and you've got some experience, you've got that financials behind you, you've got all of what you need to be able to move forward. Because to turn it into a full-time role does require you to have that backing and that money behind you, as well as the experience and the ability to know that you're going to go forward. Wesley, do you have anything for that?
Yeah, and piggybacking off of that, I think probably this question also comes from a place where the current generation watched the previous generations like work themselves to the bone, and they're not really wanting to do that anymore, which I completely get that. I think also some people underestimate the power of 9 to 5. So, like for a lot of you guys, where you're thinking about, do I actually want to become an entrepreneur? You have to think about some of the additional things that come along with that. So, like being able to take time off if you're sick, or like if somebody dies in your family, right? Or having insurance for medical, or to be able to like go see a therapist, or even having like a 401k and different things like that. When you start your own business, those are all things that fall on your lap. Especially if you have employees, you have to worry about, how am I paying my employees? Do they have benefits? If our revenue is not doing great this month, is the business going to be okay? Am I going to have to fire somebody? You have to take a lot of those things into consideration, where I'm starting a business and it's not only just about me anymore. As far as like the side gig or the small business, I would agree with Valerie in the sense that I think there's probably a larger conversation that needs to happen there with yourself, a firm believer in talking to myself, where you kind of have to figure out, is this something, the question I like to ask my clients is this something you could see yourself doing, like later on in life, like when you're ready to retire? Do you still see yourself doing this business? Do you see it passing it off to your kids, or leaving it in the community to still have people and have it be there? Is that something that you want to do later, or is this just a hobby or something that you do to produce money in the interim, but it's not something I want to do long term? So take that into consideration, but it's a lot of work that goes into turning like a side business into a full business, full blown like that.
It's funny. It reminds me of, I have a cousin who started a small business that grew into a pretty large business. So now he says he left his 9 to 5 to work 24/7. So there are definitely some trade offs when it comes to that.
Literally, when Valerie and I were looking at the question, I said it's funny that it's even considering 9 to 5, because the full business is always 24/7. Like even if you're asleep, you need to be thinking about your business.
Yep. All right. Thank you, guys. Excuse me. This is for Danny. So, how are our current economic conditions or expectations of success affecting what starting a business looks like today?
Well, I would have to be a fortune teller to know exactly how to answer this question. Certainly inflation has been up, but and there's questions about whether we're going to have a recession or we're going to make a soft landing, and those are things which interest rates, all that, that's a lot that goes into the economy. So it really depends. And I think you need to be aware of those things. It is quite possible that there is some form of recession or downturn coming up. Certainly hope not, and that would affect whatever business that you are thinking about. So it needs to be, you can't ignore economic conditions, and at the same time, I don't know that you can always predict them. Nobody predicted the housing collapse in 2009. Nobody predicted COVID when it happened and how it affected starting a business, those types of things. So there's a lot that goes into it. I don't know that it's the current economic conditions that are most concerning, outside of what you believe. Again, I think different people believe very, very differently about what the economy looks like right now. If you asked 100 people, you might get at least 50 different answers on what they think. So it has to do with what you believe about the economy. I don't think that the fundamentals necessarily change. Again, I'm not sure that answers the question. You do need to be aware about if you're being opportunistic about the business that you're choosing. You're watching. There's something that you want to hop on a wave of some type of business that seems to be doing well at the moment. Absolutely, you can pay attention to those types of trends. Also understand that they're often trends, and so hopping on a business, and I know this is maybe a very weird one to bring up, but there's those places where you can just like smash televisions and smash things and all that kind of stuff. And that was like, I know there are some that still exist, and it was trendy for a little bit, but I don't know that that's a long-term business to hop into, per se. And so the economic climate, sometimes it's about what is trending and what's not, but also being careful of picking something that is trendy at the moment. I will say also, just to go back to the previous question, one thing that is talked about is when you start out as an entrepreneur, it is often again, there's a lot more to it than actually 9 to 5. Maybe it's more irregular. There's also the ownership piece. You're working for yourself versus working for somebody else. So that can be very satisfying. I do think there are also times, depending on your financial situation and what you're trying to get out of it. One of the reasons my wife and I started her business is she wanted more control over her time. But she's also married to somebody who has another income, and so we having two incomes, her getting more control was something we talked about and has been incredibly, it's been great for us, and great for her, but not everybody's in that same situation. Again, I think you have to look at what your own desires are, what your own passions are, and also be careful about turning a passion into a business. I think there are some people that can turn their passions into businesses, and they'll never be happier than doing that. And there are other people that then turn their passion into a job, and that can also be a little bit painful when that winds up happening. Some of your hobbies that you love them because they're your hobbies. So just be aware, there's some soul searching that goes into it. I think Ali talked about like having a questionnaire to ask you about these things. There's some soul searching that goes into when you're going to start a business, and what is the purpose? Is it just because you want to make a lot of money, or money is the main factor? Okay, then that's one type of business. Is it because you want more control over your time? That may be a different type of business, and you have to be ready for the trade-offs of what you're choosing.
It's interesting, Danny. I was having a conversation with some folks the other day who are all very successful business presidents and CEOs. And that whole passion versus profit conversation came up, and I was asking what their businesses were. Half of them were in chain link fences or something super boring that I'm sure they didn't have a passion for, but it was something that they really learned to love and something that they got into to earn income.
And some people learn, I think, as you're saying, Joe, some people also just learn to love business, like the idea of conducting business and what you do in the relationships, and that can be a part of that as well.
Absolutely.
Just want to make a declaring point on something Danny said regarding a hobby versus a business. And being a tax CPA, that's something that I face on an annual basis when I see people's tax records. Is their business activity a business activity, meaning that you're really trying to make a profit, or is it a hobby? And the fine line there is IRS. If IRS defines your activity as a hobby, they don't let you deduct losses for excess expenses that you have over income. Where if it's really a business activity and you actually spent more money than you took in, you can deduct those losses. So it doesn't necessarily even mean that you spend 40 hours a week at it. It doesn't matter how many hours you spend. It's more about your intention, and that's kind of hard to prove. So a hobby, you can't deduct losses. You're not able to, but a business, you are able to deduct losses if you do have them. And hopefully none of us do.
And just quickly, because I know the time's getting short, 50% of businesses fail within the first 5 years. So you also have to know what you're getting into, as much as and there are some, like restaurants, fail at much higher rates, but 50% of businesses fail often because of not having enough cash flow, these types of things. So again, preparing to start a business, depending on its cash needs, and then also understanding it's still a risky proposition, is you just have to have your eyes wide open going in.
We'll be planning at the front end. Steve, question for you. And you touched on some of this as we kind of moved along, but one of the things we talk about in Third Decade as a part of our Magnificent Seven is be strategic. And this is preparing for things that are out of sight and out of mind, like taxes. What are some additional things that we may have not touched on so far about tax ramifications that potential business owners need to be aware of, or folks who are working as 1099 contractors? That's some things they should keep in mind.
Great question. And I really catch a lot of people that are surprised by the answer. People that have been working for a company, getting a W-2, getting refunds most years that they're in a W-2 setting, and then switching to collecting cash in a side gig or switching to being a 1099 contractor. There are some major, major differences. The key one is that when you are a 1099 contractor and not collecting a W-2, is that you're responsible for all the taxes. You're responsible for federal income taxes, state income taxes. You're responsible for Social Security and Medicare taxes. So that's the biggest thing. And I tell people to be safe, to hold aside anywhere between 25% and 30%, and to think about paying taxes in quarterly so you're not left with a big tax bill when you file your tax return. The positive part about being a contractor is in deducting things like car mileage and other expenses that you pay. When you're an employee of a company, you don't get to deduct your commute if you're commuting to an office. When you are a self-employed contractor, you get to deduct every mile, you get to deduct cell phone, internet, any kind of outlay of an expense that's related to your business. So those are the major things to think about. But the biggest one really is you are solo on your own for how to make those tax payments. And again, if you make $1,000, you got to figure about taking care of paying the government. Federal alone, anywhere from $250 to $350 on that, plus whatever state you're in. If you're in Arizona, it's 2.5%. If you're in Texas, like me, it's 0. If you're in California, it could be 11 or 12%. So all major things to keep in mind and not be shorthanded. And I've seen, sadly, people take payroll money and spend that and get in trouble. So it's not anything to slip up on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. So I think we have some time, Nikki. I have a bunch of additional questions that popped up as we were kind of talking, but I want to make sure we have enough time to answer some questions that came through in the chat first.
Okay, great. We'll go ahead and start on the few questions we got for the Q&A. We have one student says that they're currently a partner owner and they run a day-to-day a business that is doing well. They're currently easily able to max out their Roth IRA contribution annually. They're not able to max out their 401k though, because as an owner, they can only contribute 2% more than the average of all combined employees. Their staff are not big contributors yet, so their hands are tied and they are working on 401k education internally to boost this. But in the meantime, they have excess savings that they would like to invest in retirement. What would the next best tool be for retirement savings, given that they're doing all they can with their Roth IRA and 401k, but still have excess funds? Steve did type an answer in the chat. I'm unsure whether or not all participants can see that. But Steve, if you'd like to elaborate on what you said, maybe.
Sure.
Speak generally.
Sure. My general comment is it really depends on knowing what type of business structure that you're in would change the answer. So if you are a partnership or an S corp or a C corp, the answer would change. So I have a new business venture at work. It's a doctor. It's growing quite profitably, and they're an S corp. And depending on the type of entity you are, the owners are able to add in a more complex type of retirement plan and discretionarily put money away based on age and income and things like that. So it does depend on how you're operating your business, whether you are a partnership with a non-related partner, whether you're a corporation. there are different rules and types of options that you have to put more money away on an annual basis that you can control, that wouldn't be taken away from you based on how little your employees were putting money in.
Thank you. We also have, the question came in about how entrepreneurs can get insurance. I'm going to assume maybe they were speaking more generally as like health insurance, since that's the first thing most people are thinking of in like a solo endeavor. So I'll go ahead and let one of you answer that.
I mean, I can take that one. I don't want to hog the questions here, but there is marketplace insurance by way of a solo business owner getting insurance for themselves and their family. Many of my clients that don't work for a company use marketplace insurance. Its applicability every year is based on how much money you're making. There are also many licensed insurance brokers out there that represent not just one company, but multiple companies, where you can get a bundled type of health, dental, and vision plan. It really, again, it depends on how you're operating, whether you have employees, who you want or need to cover. I work for a company. I get insurance through the company. I don't, but I wouldn't get marketplace. But it really, again, depends on your entity structure.
If you're in Arizona, and I believe that the program is still intact, we just came out of the program, my nonprofit did. It doesn't matter what type of business you are. In Arizona, there's a state tax credit for businesses that have, I believe, under 15 people, and you can apply for that through the state of Arizona, and they will pay a percentage of the employee's premium for you. In other words, they act as the employer's contribution for up to 3 years. And we just came off of that, which is extremely painful. That state program does exist, and you can certainly look into the Arizona state tax credit for health insurance.
Thank you. We have another student has asked what they should do with their profits. They've heard that they should spend all or most of their profits to avoid taxes, but another thought is to roll that into another endeavor like real estate. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Steve, you probably can, but I will say one thing. If you, it's a short-term, in my opinion, that's a short-term strategy. You won't have access to things like, you have to be profitable if you want to get loans in the future. And some of these things, you'd like to build assets, invest in assets if your business can have assets, because they can be used for both your business and to secure loans. But I'll let Steve take it. But I do think sometimes people worry so much about taxes. Sometimes there are cash businesses where people don't report. And again, I'm not here to be a moralist, but what I'm telling you is you can't have it both ways. You can't then go in to a lender or somebody and say, hey, I want to borrow. I don't show any profit. I show losses, but I want to borrow, but hey, I have cash. It just doesn't work that way. You need to choose. It's a short-term strategy.
It really is. And the biggest, IRS is, and I'm not the IRS. I'm a client advocate, but and I don't tell anyone for advice to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. And I need to sleep at night. I don't want to worry about missing something or intentionally messing something up. And the biggest area that people mess up on is issuing 1099s or not giving you 1099s if you're working for them. There is a box on every type of business return, whether it's a Schedule C that you're doing on your own return, whether you're a partnership, a C corporation, or an S corporation, that asks if you have the need to file 1099s. That means that you've paid somebody more than $600. So if you've received $600 or more from someone and you're the worker, you need to ask, because you often get surprised and you think you're getting a W-2 and you find out that the company that you work for is giving you a 1099 and they didn't even give you the 1099. And then you're left with the struggle of not remembering what you received or how to report it. It's a big deal. The other big deal going on in the business community and individually is virtual currency and Bitcoin. So if you're dealing at all with Bitcoin or Dogecoin or any of the virtual currencies out there in your business or personally, that's the next big crackdown. But I never let the tax dog wag the tail. What I mean by that is, I can tell you the 9 states that have no income tax. But what if you don't want to live in one of those states? You want to live where you want to live. You want to do what you want to do. I can tell you the tax reasons or the tax benefits for doing anything, but the tax decision shouldn't drive the decision. So as Danny said, spending your monies or having no profit or having no taxes to pay, IRS is going to get smart to that. They're going to figure out how you're going to live. Are you affording to pay your rent or mortgage or paying your car payment if you're not showing any profit? So it's going to come back to bite you, whether it's a loan request or your credit rating, or otherwise. So build up the savings, even if it's in an online savings account. Get 4 or 5% instead of 4 cents like I get from my Chase account. So there's all kinds of options out there to consider, growing your business.
Great.
Jomar, do you think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions?
I think we have time. 2 quick questions we should. Yep.
Okay, let's make this one quick. Where could they find out about the free mentoring that we mentioned earlier, Wesley and Valerie?
Yes, so it's called SCORE, and on the handout there's a website where SCORE Southern Arizona, and you just go to that website and you can request a mentor. You'll be able to see all our volunteers with all their wonderful business expertise, and then you can go ahead and thank you, Wesley, and you can just request your mentor and get going.
Thank you. All right. And last one, we have someone that says they are an independent contractor consistently taking in 1099s, and they have heard repeatedly that in cases like this, it would actually be best to establish themselves as an LLC business of one person. Could you please maybe speak on this and advise how this would impact your taxes?
I certainly can. I mean, whether you're getting 1099s or cash or checks, for your work, being an LLC is something that is a personal decision. It does cost money to set one up. You can do one online yourself. You can use an attorney to set one up. There is a little bit of money to outlay to set one up, but it gives you protection from your personal assets. So if you think that the type of business or activity that you're going to perform is something that you could get sued at, you would definitely want to become an LLC or obtain an umbrella policy, which would protect against lawsuits. An LLC is also really important if you own rental property, to own a rental property in an LLC, because somebody could sue you for the heat not working or the AC breaking or something like that. But an LLC is something that you could still file on Schedule C on your taxes. You still would be responsible for all your personal taxes. It also gives you the ability to elect to be a S corporation or a C corporation. So you have lots of options with that.
Thank you so much. That'll go ahead and wrap up our Q&A, and I'll pass it back off to you, Jomar.
Yes, thank you all so much. This was a ton of information today, and I'm just really excited that you all were able to come and have this conversation with us. Our panel, you guys were amazing, and I know that there was a lot of things that our participants are going to take away from this, and hopefully we have some successful businesses that are being started or helped out because of the information that we got today. And additionally, our panelists have opportunities, whether that's through SCORE or with CIC, for potential assistance as well too. So, make sure you take that into consideration as you're moving forward. So just one piece of kind of wrap up. This was day 2 of Alumni Week, and we have one more workshop coming up on Thursday. We're just going to have a general Q&A. We have a bunch of questions come in, and we're going to be having an opportunity to have many more questions come in. So this will be a good chance. So if you haven't registered for that already, feel free to hop on and register and join us on Thursday for that conversation as well too. And again, always have to do this commercial. You know, we've grown through word of mouth, and you all came to us in various different ways as participants. So we have a new cohort starting in July. So if there's any additional friends, family, coworkers, or colleagues that you want to refer to Third Decade, please have them sign up and get ready for to start classes in July. So everybody in the panel, thank you all so much for joining us. We're super excited for this. It's going to be recorded. We're going to be sending it out to our to folks as well too. So thank you all, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day, everybody.